The location in which we mount our car audio amplifiers in an aftermarket car audio build can make or break the install. If we want reliability for years to come, some locations are definitely better than others. But like all things custom car audio, each of these different mounting locations comes with a trade-off. What may be the most reliable might not be the most practical. So before you choose an amplifier mounting location for your next build, let's talk about the benefits and drawbacks of the different options, some of which you may have never considered before. Hey, what's going on everyone? I'm Mark. Welcome to CarAudioFabrication. Here on this channel, together we learn how to master car audio and how to design, build, and install our dream car audio system. Now real quick before we get into the content, a quick thank you to our channel sponsor, Moscone America, with their Pico V2 line of amplifiers. Let's be honest, if an amplifier is compact, it's a lot easier to find a mounting location for it, and these are small. This is the 8-10, which means it has 8 amplified channels, but also has a 10-channel DSP inside. So you can control those 8 powered channels, but also 2 channels of output for additional amplifiers, like a dedicated subwoofer amplifier. The digital signal processor software built into this amplifier is quite powerful with a ton of flexibility, and there are also 4 and 6 channel options, along with a compact 900 watt at 1 ohm subwoofer amp. To learn more about these, check out the links down in the video description. Now obviously some of these locations that we're going to discuss won't necessarily apply to every single vehicle, but the first one I do want to discuss does apply to a lot of vehicles, and that is mounted on the floor of the rear cargo area. So whether it's a trunk car or a hatchback or even an SUV, mounting on the floor of that rear cargo space. In terms of reliability, this is typically a great mounting location as you're going to have a lot of room for airflow around the amplifier, but something to consider on the reliability front is obviously the amplifier is more prone to potential damage depending on how you install it. If you install some sort of rack or protection around it, you might be able to resolve that concern. But overall, most amplifiers are designed to definitely be mounted in a position where they're just simply flat. They're going to have optimal cooling in that situation. But in terms of functionality, something you have to consider is the fact that you are taking up some of the usable cargo space. So again, depending on how you install it, if you install some sort of system that allows you to still put cargo on top of the amplifiers, that may potentially help out the functionality, but you are taking up space in the cargo area. In terms of ease of installation, this is going to be one of the easiest mounting locations for sure. You're of course going to want to follow correct installation procedure in terms of how you actually physically mount this in the vehicle, but as far as being able to easily run wiring to the amplifier, you're going to have all this space around it. You could, tuck it into a corner of the trunk, of course, but allow some space for the wiring. Ease of installation is going to be quite easy. The next location to consider is on the back of the rear seats. So again, if you have a trunk vehicle or an SUV, you could mount on that angled back seat location. Now for reliability, consider that now you are no longer mounting in this mounting orientation. Now you're mounting in a slightly angled orientation. You're going to want to make sure that you're using a quality amplifier that is designed to have proper cooling in multiple different mounting orientations. Now in terms of functionality, I think you actually get a little bit more functionality once you get that up off the floor. You're kind of gaining that cargo space back in comparison to our previous example. But when it comes to the wiring and the ease of installation, do keep in mind that to do this properly, you're going to want to make sure that you're mounting to a rigid surface within that seat. You're going to want to do some proper engineering. You might need to make an additional kind of brackets type system that picks up the mounting points of the amplifier and then picks up the more rigid mounting points on the back of the seat. You're not going to want to just, send drywall screws into the back of the seat in order to mount it. You still want to follow proper installation procedure. So the ease of installation can be a little bit more challenging. And something else to definitely consider is you need to, of course, have wiring still running to this amplifier. And if that rear seat has the potential to fold down, you obviously don't want to lose that functionality. So that's something on the installation side that you are going to want to consider and make sure that you're accounting for. For those reasons, mounting on the rear of the back seat can be a little bit more difficult in terms of ease of installation. So far the 2 locations that we've talked about are locations that you can kind of just readily see by looking into the trunk of the vehicle. What if you were to do more of a hidden location, but still kind of on the floor of the vehicle? And what if you put your amplifier down within a spare tire well? I do want want to go a little bit more in depth here really quick on the proper installation procedure. Something that I frequently like to use is a threaded rivet. Simply put, a threaded rivet allows you to add a substantial thread to a thinner piece of sheet metal. Sheet metal like that of the body of the vehicle. If we're mounting into the spare tire well, sometimes we can come up with a bracket type design that picks up the same mounting location that physically holds the spare tire down, or we could design an amplifier rack that fits within the spare tire, or we could also use proper installation procedure and use something like that threaded rivet. A quick side note, if you'd like to see all the different tools and materials that I recommend, head on over to my website and click here, and that will give you a full list of a lot of different options. The benefit of using something like a threaded rivet to mount your amplifier rack or amplifier is the fact that you have a lot more serviceability. Now you can easily remove that rack, remove the amplifier if needed multiple different times by using that machine thread. All right, so back to using the spare tire well. First of all, in terms of reliability, I think this might not be as reliable if you're using an amplifier that really isn't designed for proper thermal management, as you're not going to have enough natural cooling within an enclosed chamber. So that's something you might want to consider with adding cooling fans, or again, just making sure that you choose a quality amplifier that's designed to be installed into a tighter compartment. In terms of functionality, going into the spare tire well, I think is actually quite functional. You're not losing any of your cargo space, but something to definitely consider is, are you removing the spare tire or are you retaining the spare tire? You could definitely retain the spare tire and potentially still install within that location, but if you want to keep the vehicle as functional as possible, that's something you're going to need to consider in the installation procedure. So this is why the ease of installation into that spare tire well does become a little bit more challenging, especially with the wiring. You need to have a plan for either potentially disconnecting that wiring or somehow having enough extra wiring that you can flip and rotate the rack out of position in order to access the spare tire. It makes the ease of installation a little bit more difficult. Next up, another installation location that you can use for your amplifiers is behind one of the panels in the vehicle or tucked off into one of the side cubbies in the cargo area. Much like the spare tire well location, in terms of reliability, to make sure that you have good reliability, you're going to want to make sure that you have plenty of proper airflow, or again, use a quality amplifier. And in terms of functionality, you're not losing any cargo space by being back behind a panel. Since you are also not mounting in the spare tire location, you're not losing any functionality there, but mounting behind one of the side panels is quite a bit more complex. It's not as complex if you're kind of just mounting into one of those side storage cubbies, in which case you would be losing some functionality, obviously, of the storage area. If you are going back behind a panel, it typically takes quite a bit more engineering in order to determine your actual mounting structure for the amplifiers, and also to make sure that you have proper wiring going back there. Another thing to consider on the functionality side is mounting behind a panel like this makes it a little bit more difficult to access the amplifier settings for tuning and setting up everything. If you use an amplifier like this that has a DSP built in, you could run and install a little USB patch cord that stays in the vehicle. That way, in order to tune this, you simply access that extra little USB plug and plug into it. You don't necessarily have to remove that panel in order to tap into the amplifier. But if you can't tell, there are a lot of different things to consider when you are mounting into that amplifier location, which does raise the bar for the ease of installation. Now, the next few locations we're going to talk about are definitely going to be more vehicle specific, and the first one that I want to talk about is mounting underneath the rear deck in something like a trunk vehicle. So instead of mounting on something like the floor, we're obviously now mounting the amplifier upside down underneath that rear deck, that area that typically has the rear speakers in a trunk vehicle. For reliability, again, you're going to want to make sure that the amplifier is designed to be mounted in such a orientation and still have proper cooling. But in terms of functionality, now that amplifier is up and completely out of the cargo area, but still usually quite accessible. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit more difficult of an install. You're going to be laying on your back and kind of working up against the ceiling, if you will, of the trunk, but you typically do have a lot of space around the amplifier, which makes wiring pretty easy. And honestly, there's usually a lot of wiring harnesses in that area anyways that you can run alongside to properly connect this amplifier to the vehicle. So for running the wiring, the ease of installation is a little bit easier, but what's going to make it a little bit more challenging is obviously you're going to want to come up with a proper bracket type system that's going to hold that securely to that rear deck. Now we talked a little bit about mounting to the back of a rear seat, but what about something like a truck where you typically have that small storage space that's behind the rear seats, or even if it's a single cab truck behind the front seats, you usually have that back wall that you can mount up against, and that's another good amplifier mounting location. Depending on the vehicle in terms of reliability, you may not have as much airflow back there, so something you might want to evaluate, but in terms of functionality, oftentimes we're not using that space for anything anyways, unless it might just be a small amount of extra storage. Typically, it's a great location for amplifiers because we aren't really using it. Additionally, in terms of ease of installation, I think it's also pretty simple to install into that location because, again, you're oftentimes going to have plenty of room around the amplifier to easily run the wiring. I think the most challenging aspect of that location is just coming up with the proper amp rack shape that allows you to have a nice flat rack that you can easily attach to the rear of the vehicle. Now, what about under the front or rear seats? In my opinion, typically the only vehicle that you're going to find yourself installing under the rear seats would be something like a pickup truck. And for a pickup truck application, I think that it's better to use that space for something like subwoofers. So for the most part, let's focus on talking about underneath the front seats. A big thing to consider on the reliability front for that under the seat location is a lot of vehicles have a heating and cooling duct that goes underneath those front seats, and it blows air onto the feet of passengers that are in the rear of the vehicle. So while you could potentially use that as an amplifier cooling solution, as long as you're always running air conditioning, do keep in mind that if it is cold out and you're running heat, now you are pumping heat directly onto those amps. Now for functionality, if you can fit an amplifier underneath those front seats, a lot of times you're not using that space for anything else anyhow. You're not really using it for storage or anything like that. But you are, of course, going to want to make sure that when you are installing in that location that you're designing the mounting solution properly to allow for the seat to still go back and forth as needed. And you're also going to want to account for the wiring in that situation so that the wiring doesn't get pinched as you move that seat back and forth or adjust it up and down. This is why mounting an amplifier in the underseat location definitely can have a more challenging ease of installation, as you have to account for all those things. And although you can oftentimes remove the seat in order to install the amplifier, that does take up some installation time. But on the other side of the coin, it is usually quite easy to run wiring to that location, as you can simply run under the carpet of the vehicle and connect to your amplifier, and you oftentimes have enough access around the different sides of the amplifier, again, for that routing of the wires. Now, another mounting location here, and this is probably one of the most challenging in terms of ease of installation, would be to go behind something like a glove box or in a center console, basically anywhere else in the vehicle that it's kind of tucked away. This, of course, is going to be largely vehicle dependent. Some vehicles have a ton of space behind the dash, and some vehicles have literally no space behind the dash. But again, a couple of things to consider. In terms of reliability, vehicle dependent, make sure that you're avoiding any potential heating ducts. In terms of functionality, if you're going behind something like a glove box, obviously make sure that that glove box can still open and shut as needed. Same goes for something like a center console. And in terms of ease of installation, since you don't really have any natural mounting points a lot of times in some of these different locations, you're going to be coming up with a pretty unique and engineered bracket a lot of times to utilize these locations. So I would think that ease of installation is a bit more difficult. Again, highly vehicle dependent, especially when it comes to the ease of being able to run wiring to that location. Now, this next one I definitely wanted to save towards the end because it's something that we commonly see all the time, and that is to mount the amplifier onto the subwoofer enclosure of the vehicle. This can or cannot be a great mounting location, again, depending on a few different factors, so much so that I covered it in a full video here on the channel along with some of my recommendations for if you are going to go that route. So I'd love to get your input. What location did you find was best for your vehicle if you've already installed into it, or what are you planning on doing? Was there any other locations that I missed? Be sure to let us know. Now don't forget, for your next car audio build, definitely be sure to check out our show sponsor, Moscone America, with their Pico V2 lineup of amps. These are so compact and they have a ton of functionality with that DSP built in. Check out the full lineup at the links down in the video description. A big thanks to them along with Jerry and the rest of the Patreon membership team for making these videos possible, and thank you guys so much for tuning in and watching.